Hi, Ahalan from Geoverse again. We've got another episode of Explains the News, and today I wanted to go into some more detail about our topic from last time. Extreme weather, and more specifically extreme heat, are still dominating the headlines, so we'll be going over those. I'll also be going into some more detail about global warming, climate change, and a few other topics. This episode is going to be pretty fun, so without further ado, let's get started. We won't be talking as much about floods this week, but I did want to note that various storm systems around North America have continued to devastate communities. Flooding along the Delaware River Valley in eastern Pennsylvania took the lives of a young family in a highly publicized search along the river. Meanwhile, Nova Scotia, a Canadian province a bit northeast of Maine, experienced its worst flooding in over 50 years as storms dumped over several dozen inches of water around Halifax, the capital of Nova Scotia, blocking access to a major port and causing millions of dollars in damage due to flooding. We talk a bit more about flooding in last week's episode, but I wanted to reiterate this week that these record breaking floods are continuing to appear and cause a good bit of trouble. We also talked about wildfires last week, and I mentioned that they were causing damage in the Canary Islands and other parts of Europe. This week, a particularly major fire devastated the Greek island of Rhodes. 20,000 residents have evacuated their homes due to the widespread flames, and thousands of tourists have fled the island. I wanted to briefly touch on tourism on that note. As the map on the right shows, it's incredibly important for many European countries, especially in the Mediterranean and the Balkans, the two areas that have been worst affected by this heat wave. As global warming progresses, major heat waves and wildfires will likely become more common in this region and in the rest of Europe. This has major implications for many of these countries, which rely on tourism for a significant chunk of GDP, as disaster zones become unsafe for tourism for a while. And in the summer tourist season, that can mean millions or sometimes even billions in losses for these countries. I just think this is something worth thinking about here while we go into a larger context of what caused these wildfires, heat waves. So, our main headline and focus this week is going to be heat waves, which have slowly spread their influence across many parts of the globe this summer. Looking at this map from last Saturday, we can see that many parts of the northern hemisphere are seeing unusually hot temperatures. Nearly the entirety of North Africa and the Middle East are seeing temperatures above 100 or 110 degrees Fahrenheit, which is really hot even by that region's standards. Of course, last week's heat waves in the US and Europe still persist. I wanted to talk a bit this week about some common terms that might get thrown around while discussing heat events in a geographical context, and do some clarifying that may help you get a better understanding of these events. First off, I wanted to differentiate between a drought and a heat wave. You might have heard about droughts before, and these are essentially extended dry periods, so below average rainfall. Regions can be in a state of unusual dryness, but depending on the length, it might not be drought. A short term drought lasts a few weeks, while a long term drought, the kind that makes the headlines, such as California's drought a few years ago, usually lasts at least 6 months. By comparison, heat waves are defined, well, by their heat. They're periods of unusually hot weather, generally caused by a high pressure region, sometimes called an anticyclone. A bit about pressure's role in this. Heat waves form when high pressure air sinks low in the atmosphere and pushes lower warm air to the ground. Compression enables further heating as the high pressure zone bounces back up and forms a dome, shoving other weather systems away as it lingers and forms a sort of bubble that keeps heating up in a bit of a feedback loop until it finally bursts. Think of the high pressure zone as a balloon that you bounce onto the ground. The balloon distorts a bit and flattens, kind of like the high pressure air. Now, imagine that one side of the balloon landed on glue. The other side stretches up while trying to bounce until it pops. That's kind of how heat waves work. These two terms, as I've demonstrated, are technically wholly separate. However, they do enable each other. For drought, hotter areas have more evaporation and thus less water, so heat waves make drought more severe. In turn, drier areas heat faster and easier. Think of deserts. So drought strengthens heat waves. I also wanted to talk separately about the difference between global warming and climate change, two terms that are similar in their usual context but technically differ a good bit. I covered global warming last week, and to recap, it's a phenomenon that occurs as human emitted greenhouse gases strengthen a sort of greenhouse barrier that normally lets most solar radiation out. But the strengthened barrier instead keeps more radiation in Earth, heating up the planet's temperature. I only mentioned global warming last week, as climate change is technically not an originally man made phenomenon. Long term changes in climate change have repeatedly happened in Earth's history. However, what makes this current wave of climate change notable is that it is mainly anthropogenic. Looking at this graph here, we can see that human drivers of global temperature, i.e., greenhouse gases, nearly single handedly explain the current rise in temperature, which wouldn't have happened if only the natural drivers of temperature were active. So, global warming is caused by human pollution, and climate change is caused by this global warming. Now, I wanted to go on a brief detour as to why heat specifically, as a natural disaster, is so threatening in the broader scheme of our changing climate and global warming strengthened and induced issues. As we can see on the graph on the left from a few years ago, heat has continuously been the biggest weather related killer across all categories of time. I also found this graph on the right as well and wanted to give you a bit of a picture of what goes on under our skin when we are exposed to too much heat. Essentially, heat is a form of stress, and our body responds by redirecting blood to help improve circulation and processing of heat and using sweating. Our nerves serve as our primary way of detecting heat, and so they and our brain help regulate these processes appropriately depending on how hot we feel. The response might change depending on dehydration, age, and a few other factors. One major drawback of these responses is that they put additional stress on the heart while decreasing its capacity, a dangerous combo. It's then no surprise that cardiovascular diseases and afflictions, including heart attacks and cardiac arrests, are the leading killers during heat waves. Sweating can also speed up dehydration without any replenishment, in turn, exacerbating the kidneys, which can then get injured or fail as well. As a whole, high bodily temperatures due to heat, as well as decreases in blood and water due to the redirection of these to the skin, can eventually damage most of our organs in a potentially fatal heat stroke, with the lungs and brain at particularly high risk. So, these bodily disasters are essentially enabled and induced by the natural disaster of heat. Now, staying safe in heat is fairly simple but incredibly good for your health during heat waves. Drinking water is a top priority, as dehydration is a constant threat in hot weather. Try and keep yourself cool by avoiding the outdoors during high temperature periods of the day, wearing light clothes, such as shorts, and bringing a hat. Also, protect yourself from sunburn, which is also a threat. Make sure to wear your sunscreen. Some warning signs of heat illness and stroke are dizziness, nausea, exhaustion, and a loss of consciousness in severe cases. This week, I wanted to talk a bit about what you can do to stop global warming, a planetary problem that requires every person do their part. To summarize, I came up with 3 ads you should follow. Adopting a greener lifestyle means reducing your carbon footprint. So, how much you contribute as a consumer to global warming. Think about switching to renewable energy. Solar panels are a common and good choice. Using energy efficient appliances, lighting and air conditioning, taking public transport or commuting, or recycling. Adapting to a warmer world means understanding the resource stress our planet is undergoing and switching lifestyle choices as a result. Think about avoiding food waste, eating more plant based food. Livestock consume a lot more water, food, and land and also contribute to emissions. And, of course, saving water during the day through shorter showers, turning off the tap while brushing, and watering lawns and plants in the evening. Advocating for your future means using your voice to help fight climate change. This is especially flexible. It can mean volunteering in local cleanups, or writing to a legislator, or joining a climate action organization. The choice here is yours. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video and see you next time.